Chair of the Government Operations Committee. We're joined here by my colleagues, lead sponsor, City Council President Andrea Campbell, and my colleagues to my left, City Councilor Ed Flynn and City Councilor Frank Baker. We are here today to discuss Docket 1337, an ordinance establishing the Office of Inspector General within the City of Boston. We are currently in the Ianella Chambers, named after one of our guests here, Richard Ianella's father, the late President of the Boston City Council, Chris Ianella. So welcome back to the Council Chambers to Richard Ianella. This ordinance seeks to create an independent Office of Inspector General in the City of Boston. The purpose proposes that the Office of the Inspector General is to ensure honesty, integrity, transparency, and efficiency in city government by rooting out waste, abuse, fraud, corruption, and mismanagement. The ordinance also lays out procedures for the qualifications and appointment of Inspector General, as well as the office's jurisdiction, powers, duties, prohibited activities, as well as funding for the office, among other things. I'd like to note that this hearing is being streamlined on Boston City Council TV online. It's also being recorded and broadcast on Comcast Channel 8, RCN Channel 82, and Verizon 1964. Anyone in attendance wishing to offer public testimony may do so by signing the sign-in sheet near the chamber entrance, in which case we will take you in order of your arrival. I know that we have some guests that are also joining us by phone, so they're able to hear this through the phone, and at the appropriate time, we'll ask them to offer their testimony as well. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to the lead sponsor for some brief opening comments. If my other colleagues have a desire to do the same, then we'll get right into the discussion. So Chair recognizes Council President Andrea Campbell.
Thank you, Councilor Flaherty, and thank you to all the panelists who agreed to testify today. Really appreciate it. The goal of the hearing, as my colleague said, is to explore and discuss the proposed ordinance, which I call for, which is creating a independent office of an Inspector General. And before I sort of jump into a couple of reasons why I think this is important, I first heard about this actually as council president going to conferences with other municipalities who talked about various offices they had that ensured good governance, transparency, accountability. This includes Baltimore, Chicago, other major cities, and in some instances, of course, some of these cities also have Inspector General offices at the county level or the state level. Fast forward, obviously, given some of the conversations in the city of Boston with respect to scandals and other things, I thought it was not only a good idea to introduce it, but I wanted to be very clear that it's not meant to be reactionary. I don't want folks to get the sense that the city of Boston has some corrupt government where employees are going rogue and stealing money or doing things that are not adhering to good government standards or not doing the best to their ability to execute their responsibilities as public employees. That is far from the case. We have a workforce that is dedicated. Many of our employees have worked for decades. I often say are overworked and underpaid. And so the vision for this office is how can you set up an office that, say, works in partnership with the State Inspector General, who is here with us today, so thank you, but does so at the local level, not from a reactive stance, but from a proactive stance, has the authority to go into our departments to work with our respective or various employees on issues of finances. We put forth policies around equity and good governance and transparency. Who's ensuring that they're actually being implemented across an entire department? If complaints come forward about misbehavior, where can you send those complaints to? Who can follow up? And who can do it in such a way that they have the authority and the mandate to do it without being asked by a councilor or a mayor. The goal of the office is also to be independent. So the appointment process calls for not just the mayor and the council to play a role in appointing various positions, corporation counsel, the city auditor, but also an advisory board that would be created by members of the public to inform that appointment. This came about through looking at various appointment structures for other municipalities across the country. Also, the Community Preservation Act, I think, is a great example of where we used a public process and a community process to appoint a committee that oversees those dollars and that went quite well. I think people are very happy. So the independence really has to come from the appointment itself. It also speaks to, the ordinance also speaks to being able to only remove whoever is appointed to the IG position for cause, and that has to go through a public process. In addition, if there are complaints that come forward, whether through a hotline or some other structure set up by this office, that IG is equipped with powers to not only investigate, but of course refer to appropriate authorities to also investigate, but to ensure that those investigations are done publicly. One of the things we see often is that many investigations are turned over to private law firms. I used to work at one. They are not cheap. They're really expensive. The public does not often have an opportunity to weigh in, to say, no, I don't want my tax dollars spent that way. We don't get updates from these law firms. They're not required to come before the council or public body to give us updates around, on how their investigation is going. This office could change that, could begin to do investigations in a more public manner, and possibly save resources for the city of Boston. And those resources could be redirected to create this office. In the proposed ordinance, it also talks about subpoena powers, which I think are critical if we get to an instance or a case where folks don't want to be cooperative, which we haven't necessarily seen that in the city of Boston, but it's a useful tool. And lastly, I will say that, you know, this, well, I'll say two more things. One, the ordinance speaks to a term, and a term that covers 5 years versus 4, which aligns with the mayor, and obviously the council is every 2 years, with the hopes that there won't be political interference. This office is designed to not be a watchdog, but to literally work, hopefully in partnership with city employees, with leadership in government, so that we deliver to the public a government that, of course, is free of corruption and waste, but grounded in values of transparency, fairness, and accountability. The response from folks in my district and across the city when I introduced this has been wonderful. People have put forth ideas. Some have even sent resumes for the job, and I said, okay, we're far from that point, but thank you for expressing your interest. But the response has been great, and I think why people are excited is this ordinance was never designed to specifically be about the ZBA or the BPDA. This is an opportunity for an office to work with every single department in the city of Boston to ensure good governance, and to do it in a proactive way. But most importantly, it's something that we can actually do on our side. It's an ordinance. It's not a home rule petition. We don't have to go through the State House, and that is difficult to navigate to get things done. This is something that we can have a conversation locally and then set up locally to be able to ensure that this office is effective and impactful, and then also, of course, retaining the powers to revisit something like this if something isn't working out. So thank you very much for participating today, for the calls, for the conversations even before this hearing. Thank you to my colleagues for being here, including those who couldn't, but who had good things to say. And thank you, Councilor Flaherty, for chairing the hearing and ensuring that we had a hearing quickly. So thank you.
Thank you, Madam President. We've also been joined by my colleague, City Councilor Matt O'Malley. Any other additional opening comments at this time? Waving, so very good. So we're joined, we have a very illustrious panel here. We have Glenn Cooner, who's the Inspector General for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, Matt Cahill, who's the Executive Director of the Boston Finance Commission. We also have Meg Cohen, Chairperson of the Boston Finance Committee, joined by fellow Boston Finance Commission members Richard Iannella and Charisse Perry. Richard, obviously, as I mentioned earlier, is a former member of the Boston City Council. So welcome to the first panel, and I guess I'll turn it right over to the Inspector General for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. If you bring greetings from the Commonwealth, as well as introduce yourself for the record for those that are viewing at home, and you have the floor, sir. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Councilors, Madam President. So my name is Glenn Cunha. I'm the Inspector General. I'm in my 7th year of my and I'm in the 2nd year of my 2nd term. So the Inspector General's office was created by statute in 1980, and it was created as a result of the building of UMass Boston, which led to a number of indictments and prison time for legislators who were taking bribes and allowing the construction to be shoddy without any regard for the competency of the individuals who obtained the contracts. So as a result of that, the legislature created a blue ribbon panel that was called the Ward Commission. It was chaired by the former Amherst College president, John William Ward. And one of the main recommendations to the legislature from that panel was to set up the first independent statewide inspector general. And at that time, the federal government had been forming an inspector general system, which was in each secretariat. There was a inspector general. So this was really the first statewide inspector general's office. And initially, the office was designed to set up bidding procedures and procurement law so that the type of actions that happened at UMass Boston would never happen again. So my predecessor, the first Inspector General, Joe Barresi, really focused most of his term. He had 2 terms too, which by statute, the Inspector General is allowed 2 5-year terms appointed by the governor, the auditor, and the Attorney General. His focus was on the development of Chapter 30B, which is the Uniform Procurement Act. The next Inspector General was Bob Sarasoli, a former state rep, and his focus was really on education. So right now, the statutory mandate for our office, I'll tell you that, which is to prevent and detect fraud, waste, and abuse in the expenditure of government funds. So the prevention piece of it was really something that IG Sarasoli was interested in developing the education program that we currently have in our office. And then the third Inspector General, that was Greg Sullivan, who was also a former state rep. And Greg's contribution to the office, among other things, was really develop the way we do our investigations and to have a high quality staff of investigators who put together cases to work with. By statute, we do work with the Attorney General's office and the U.S. Attorney's Office for prosecutions, but we obviously work with a lot of the local DAs too. And my background is as a prosecutor. So I was a prosecutor for 17 years between the Norfolk and Suffolk DAs and then the Attorney General's office, where I finished my time there as the managing attorney of the Criminal Bureau. So my background, not only as a lawyer but as a prosecutor, was new to the Inspector General's office, as none of my predecessors were lawyers, let alone prosecutors. And so my mandate really was not only to increase and improve the type of referrals that we gave to prosecuting agencies, but was also to work collaboratively. Governor Patrick was the first governor who had appointed me. I've since been reappointed by Governor Baker, but Governor Patrick's point in my appointment from him was to work collaboratively with people. There doesn't need to be gotcha investigations. There can be collaboration with independence. And that's a fine line to walk, and I think over the last 7 years we've really been able to do that. So that's some of the history. I talked about our mandate, talked about the prevention piece of it, which is our education program, which is developed over the years. When I got there, we were training probably about 500 people a year. We train well over 2,200 people a year now. We have over 50 different courses that we teach. We aren't just at our office. We have a classroom across the street in Ashburton Place, but we are all throughout the state. We travel from here to Provincetown, which actually we're doing a program in Provincetown today, to Berkshire County. So we are accessible to everyone throughout the state. The detection piece of it is our civil and criminal investigations that we do. As I mentioned, we have relationships with prosecutors, and we have relationships with local governments throughout the state, whether it's to help them increase the efficiency of their government, work on ways for them to put controls in place so that they prevent fraud and waste of our tax dollars. Now, with regard to the City of Boston, we've been here serving the City of Boston. We continue to serve the City of Boston. Just in my term, some of the cases that I think have been somewhat high profile, but you can look at our website to see them. We work closely with the Boston Finance Commission on this one. For me, it was a big case because I think it changed the way the former BRA does business. It was the easement on the former Yawkey Way, now Jersey Street, Jersey Way, where the Red Sox have an easement for, I think it's 120 days a year, whether it's from a game or an event. And not to get too much into that, but for us, that was something that we opposed from the beginning. We wrote 2 reports on this. We had litigation on this because there was a lack of cooperation. But the bottom line there was the creation of the Inspector General's office really had to do with, one of the things it had to do with was the valuation of public property. And what happened in the Yawkey Way, Jersey Street easement is going to reverberate in the city of Boston for years, because the Boston Red Sox got that easement for $4 million, paid for over 10 years without even consideration for the time value of money. And after 10 years, which is going to be 2023, not 4 years off, they will own that easement as long as Major League Baseball is played at Fenway Park. That's going to be long past all of our lifetimes, I'm sure. And we know, even though the Red Sox never ended up, even though they had agreed in 2002 to share the revenue that they get from that easement, we know that they make millions of dollars off of that. And their response to that was, we pay taxes. Well, you want to know something? All the rest of us pay taxes. So that was something that went through, and we were very concerned about that, primarily because the city of Boston was going to lose out on that. And that was really important to our office. Prosecutions that we've done with our AG partners as well as U.S. Attorney, that was high profile, a Boston fire lieutenant who was responsible for procurement. When you purchase a fire truck for about $700,000-800,000, that what comes with that, monies back for the department to do training, that all went into his pocket. And he was prosecuted and convicted. The Roxy housing, where the people who were waiting on a waiting list for years, and then as a result of bribes, there were people who were getting to the head of that waiting list. We were first on that and involved in those prosecutions. And most recently, the Davis Leadership Academy, where its head had left after 13 years, and she received a $110,000 payout. Now, that's a public charter school. That's money gone from students in the city of Boston. And primarily, the takeaway from that was she got paid the $110,000 because she said she never took a vacation day or a sick day in her 13 years. And when we pushed back, the board of trustees couldn't hold back any payment because they never asked her to account for her time. Regardless, our investigation showed she took time off frequently, but it was never recorded, and they had to pay her that money, which came out of the mouths of students. How we can work with the city of Boston going forward, we've had meetings with the mayor and have said, you know, we want to work with you, and he, especially the new mayor, has been, the recent mayor, we started when Menino was mayor, and we're meeting with him tomorrow. We're interested in working with the city of Boston. Right now, currently, we have a hotline where people do call from the city of Boston. We have our training program. People, I think we looked before we came, I think well over 30 people have certifications from our office. We've trained over 300 people in the city of Boston in our classes. Our classes are open for anybody to come. We are willing, as we are willing with any municipality, to come and create classes for whatever department it might be that needs training, whether it be procurement, fraud prevention. One of the things that came out of the Davis Leadership Academy is we've been working with college and university trustees to train them. As a result of, you may have remembered our case that involved the Westfield State University president who had spent hundreds of thousands of dollars of state dollars right with the cooperation or under the nose of the Board of Trustees. And so we want to be able to train trustees at public charter schools like we have been training trustees at public universities, because some of them don't understand, as the board at Davis Leadership Academy, they have a fiduciary duty to the taxpayers. So we have trainings, we have hotlines, our hotline, we have a number of hotlines. We have a fraud hotline that's open. One of the hallmarks of our office is confidentiality, and that's what's really important for when people call us and call us back, because they know that whatever they tell us must remain confidential. Our statute has a provision that if we aren't confidential with the referrals that we get, then the person in our office that may disclose that is subject to criminal penalties. So I think in closing, the issues that we provide, the issues that are important here are having an office which exists, that's independent and provides confidentiality, and is willing to collaborate and have relationships with the taxpayers, the agencies throughout the Commonwealth.
Thank you very much, Inspector General. So it would be fair to say that you're saying that we already have that?
That's right.
Gotcha.
And, you know, our budget has increased over the years, and the size of the office has increased over the years. So when I got there, I think we had 39 people. Today, we have 64 employees at the office. When I got there, our total budget, because we have different line items, as I was telling the council president the other day, we have 3 units that have been created in the 7 years I've been there that are embedded in agencies. We have 1 unit that's in EOHHS, 1 unit that's in DOT, and 1 unit that has recently been in the Mass State Police, and they're dedicated to just those areas. So our budget when I first got there was probably about $2.5 million, and we've probably doubled that to take care of what our mandate is and the units that we are responsible for. So right now, taxpayers are spending about $5 million for the operation of our office, and what we give back in terms of recoveries and restitution from cases is well beyond that.
Very good. Thank you, Inspector General. Matt, great to see you back here in the council chambers. If you could just state your name and affiliation for the record, and you have the floor.
Sure. My name is Matt Cahill. I'm the Executive Director of the City of Boston Finance Commission. Thank you all for giving me the opportunity today. I thought I'd speak a little bit about what our office does on a day-to-day basis. Let me first say that I was one of the people who took Glenn's classes, and I would highly recommend it becomes mandatory for every city employee who does procurement. Fantastic, and it's really well run, and the follow-up was amazing. So as an agency, you can see 3 of our members here. We have a total of 5 members. They're citizens of the City of Boston, and extremely valuable to the services we provide to the taxpayers and to the City Council and to the Mayor's office. On any given day, we go through unadvertised contracts for the City of Boston. So they come through our office. Anything over $50,000 that is 30B, Mass General Law 30B, doesn't require to go to 30B. So we generally, on any given day, we're doing probably between 3 and 5. This year alone, in this fiscal year, we've gone through 304 contracts. That's with an office of 3 people with a value of $313 million. The reason we review these is because even though some of them may be legal, there's a common sense approach that any one of us as consumers would look at that might be legal but may not necessarily pass a common sense approach. And just to let you know, since July of 2016, we have gone through 1,527 contracts reviewed with a total value of $2.3 billion. And again, that's with 3 people. So our approach is this. We take the contracts in, we get them from every department across the city. We take a look at them to make sure the paperwork's correct. We then take a look at them for just a common sense. So we've had contracts that people have sent to us, in particular, a couple of them, just to give you a definition of what we look at. One of them came in that we do a historic review of the contracts. This particular vendor came in last year, had been $40 an hour. This year came in at $2,100 a day. Same services, we couldn't figure out what the difference was. We conducted research, pulled the invoices, started asking questions. When we asked those questions, we found that it was just because the vendor had asked for that amount of money. That contract was a school department contract. The way we view it is, any money that we're not spending on the children of the school system, we're basically wasting. We contacted the vendor said the same thing, I asked for more money. That vetting process is a problem for us, and as a commission, we bring it to our members advise us, we send a letter to the school department, to the mayor, and we let them know that we have a problem. We rejected that contract. The contract was nullified. Another good example is, we had a contract come in that they decided that they were going to pay $40 an hour to a vendor. When we looked up the actual payments, it was $240 an hour. Nobody seemed to be following up on it, and again, I think it was just because somebody had misread the contract. But that money goes out the door, and we cannot recoup it. We also act as a complaint valve for the city of Boston. That would be for any employee, vendor, citizen, taxpayer, anybody who works in any department in the city. Over the course of time, every month we provide an executive summary to our directors, our board, to make sure that they know what we're looking at. We've had anything from gas being stolen from city gas tanks by employees. And by the way, these are employees complaining. So these, like you said earlier, there's a lot of wonderful people working here who just want to come in and do their job. And that one bad apple can really make everybody else look bad. So we don't view it as the entire department's bad. We view it as somebody's coming to us to try to correct this problem. We write reports. We write to the department heads. We write to the mayor's office. We assure that there's investigations going on, and we conduct them, and we do inventory reports. Over the course of time, we have also acted as a review and report panel. So we've looked at the healthcare plans for the city of Boston. We're currently looking at paving operations for the city of Boston. We actually get out of the cars and go and look at the cuts and the repaving, and we report back to our commission. We also review the RFPs for the city of Boston. One of them that we recently looked at was down at Frontage Road, and several of the concerns we had was, where are you going to replace this in a place that's convenient to the taxpayers, to the people that work there? Our cars are repaired there. If we don't have a reasonable travel time, we're losing a lot of man hours going back and forth to wherever that new place is going to be. So we like to see a full action plan when something comes to us. We want to know what that full value is going to be, and if someone's done some sort of inventory on how much that financial value is going to be. So a few examples of a few of the issues we found through the contracting process. We found recently that the school department, we started looking through a contract that we had received, and we found out that the school department had been leasing out buses and leasing out properties, and instead of the money going into the coffers of the city of Boston, they were going into a private fund. We alerted the auditor, we alerted the mayor's office, and what came of that was, we found that some of the employees of the school department were actually going to this private fund and saying, we need briefcases, and they were getting them, and there was no process, public process for the city of Boston. We spoke to the auditor, Sally Glora, at the time. Sally Glora was able to create revolving funds, and the money stopped going into the private coffers and going into the public coffers. So at this point, that money goes in, and it goes back out, and it's replenished by those same values. So I think what I'd like to stress here is that we are of value to the city in trying to look at these things that are important to you, and certainly under this mandate. And if we're utilized in that way, we can certainly add to it, but we are restricted by the number of people we have. And at any given time, any person in the city of Boston wants to come to us, any employee of the city of Boston, we are there 100% for them. And we don't work set hours. With our staff, we work 24/7, and on vacations, it's the way we have to operate. But if there's any questions, please let me know. Thank you very much.
Very good. Thank you, Matt. And I don't know if Meg as chairperson or Richard or Sharice has anything to add to that.
I think we're going to go in.
Perfect. Very good.
Sure.
Great. Sharice, welcome.
Good afternoon. Sharice Perry, Commission member of the Boston Finance Commission. So I think as already been stated that, out of the governor's office, we have an inspector general's office, and as Matt has articulated and provided some examples, I think when you look at the mission of the Boston Finance Commission, there's a lot of overlap in terms of what our office does and what the office does to address investigations, to be transparent, to be an independent kind of operation. And in terms of what our mission is, we carry that through. And the appointment of the people on the commission is very much in line with how you all are proposing to appoint people through this particular ordinance, in that we are all citizens. We all have a varieties of backgrounds and criteria, whether it's attorneys, as I am myself, or we've just been longstanding members of the City of Boston. We're all very much committed to this particular process, and we all bring a wealth of knowledge in that. I believe that the role of the commission serves the purpose that is intended by the ordinance that you are proposing at this time. And I think that if, with the appropriate support, perhaps in the increased funding in the particular operations of this department, of the commission, that there is a lot more that the Boston Finance Commission can achieve. As Matt articulated, there's 3 staff. The budget is under $300,000. And although we are all appointed by the governor's office, the City of Boston pays the budget for the Boston Finance Commission, and so it's well within your budgetary kind of powers to be able to increase that. I think the other benefit of this is that, we are public, our meetings are public, whether they're in the Curley Building or if there's recommendations for them to take place in other places, that is option. Ours are, there's minutes, everything is transparent about what it is that we provide, and I think if, as the City Council begins to change over, perhaps there's a lot more education and more visibility of the Finance Commission, that we serve as a resource to the citizens and the taxpayers, as well as the City Council, to begin to look at other ways that we can, again, provide that additional support. So, I would encourage everyone to kind of look at what is the kind of mission of the State Inspector General, as well as the Boston Finance Commission, and start to identify ways that we can either expand the work that we do versus kind of creating a separate entity that appears to be doing the exact same things that we are.
Thank you very much, Sharice. Make a good point. Obviously, we get several new members coming on, 4 new members coming on, and there's 3 current new members in their first term. So it's enough just to learn the council rules as well as the city charter, but on top of that, to know that there's lots of stuff. So I think my expectation is there's going to be a lot of educating going on in the weeks and months ahead for the new members, as well as some of the existing members.
Absolutely.
So it's a very fair point. Richard, welcome back.
Thank you, Michael, very much, councilors. It really is an honor for me to be back in this chamber today. It was in this room that I learned many very important lessons of life. One of those lessons I will quote from the person that this chamber is named after. We have to watch the bureaucrats. They love to spend other people's money. Those words inspired me. When I left public life, I wanted to stay involved. I wanted to have a role watching the pockets of the taxpayers. Those words are why I am a volunteer member of the Boston Finance Commission. As I reflected back over the term of the last 3 mayors, I concluded public servants are far more hardworking and honest today than ever before. One bad apple should never ruin the reputation of over 20,000 municipal employees who work tirelessly for our citizens. These people every day make a positive impact on our lives, and we should be saying thank you to them. When I arrived at the FinCom 5 years ago, they had just gotten the okay from the Walsh administration to hire a 3rd staff person. What amazed me was seeing the job these 3 people did with very, very limited resources. Today, I'm going to give the council a few examples of what we've accomplished since I've been on the FinCom. On the grounds of Charlestown High School was a tennis bubble, known as the Stillman Tennis Center. A group known as CHAD, Charlestown Against Drugs, operated the tennis program for kids. Sounds like a good idea, right? It was. But also, there was a problem. There was a for-profit was operating on this facility, running tennis leagues and providing lessons. And guess who was paying the bill for the facility? That's right, the taxpayers. The FinCom uncovered the following: $15,000 every year to put up and take down the facility, $3,000 to rent forklifts and drivers, $1,500 to annually maintain generators, $1,000 for electrical work, $8,700 for lighting, $9,200 to purchase backup generators. And probably what was the most appalling for me is they had a direct line from Charlestown High School to fuel the building, to keep the bubble afloat. And we never knew how much the taxpayers had to pay for that. Chad did fully cooperate with our investigation. Today, the taxpayers are no longer have any financial obligation. We all remember the Olympics. Guess what? It was the Boston Finance Commission who were the one, if not the first, agency to hold public hearings. We invited the proponents, we invited the opponents, the traffic experts, and the professor/author who wrote the book known as The Economic Gamble: How Cities Take Huge Risks Associated. At all of our public meetings, the State Inspector General had representation in the room. Very quickly, we realized Boston did not need this as an economic tool. We are a world-class city. We have the best hospitals, universities, tech companies, legal minds, American history, a AAA bond rating, the Pops, the Symphony, and now proudly we are called the City of Champions. Proudly, each and every one of us pounds our chest and says, we are Bostonians. The agenda of the Boston Finance Commission was simple. We were not going to leverage the Olympics on the taxpayers today or in generations to come. We were prepared to say no to the Olympics in Boston. Very soon, we will be seeing a new skyscraper being added to our skyline, as we all know as Winthrop Square. It was the Boston Finance Commission who worked closely with this body to ensure that we got every dollar deserved for the land when it was sold. The BRA said the value of the garage was $20 to $40 million. The council and the FinCom says this wasn't the value of a garage, it was the value of the land, and the land was worth 3 to 4 times more of that. We supported the council's memorandum of agreement to have the city, not the BRA, control the money when it was sold. At the end of the day, it was proven the process worked. The property sold for $150 million. That cash infusion will be spent in every neighborhood of Boston, benefiting all Bostonians. We know the reputation of Boston of having lousy streets. Contractors and utility companies ripped up new streets, applying temporary patch to repair them. The city finally said, enough of this. And the city, to its credit, made these contractors, made these utility companies pay a fee every time a city street was going to be torn up. And not did they tell you to just fix the hole, they said fix 25 feet on either side of it. Yes, this was a great idea. Recently, the Boston Finance Commission has discovered that the money that has been collected for years, to the tune of $31 million, has never been used to repave the streets. The $31 million eventually will be used to repave the streets. Today, we are working with the administration to fix more roads and ensure, moving forward, that these monies will not be sitting in a pot somewhere unspent, but they will be used to fix the roads that the money was put aside for. Again, a win for Boston residents. In closing, let me say this. Very quietly, very effectively, the Boston Finance Commission is doing the job. We are not looking for fanfare. We are not looking for headlines. We are looking to change the lives of the citizens of Boston in a positive way and to eliminate waste, fraud, and abuse in city government. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Meg, welcome.
Thank you, Councillor, and thank you to all the different city councillors and council president who are present. I've had the privilege of being on the Boston Finance Commission since 2011, appointed by Governor Deval Patrick. I have learned an awful lot about the city by participating in the monthly meetings for the past, count it, eight years, almost 9. And it's really been a privilege. I also have been the chair since probably 2013. As our members have said, the mission of the Boston Finance Commission is to make recommendations to the City of Boston regarding how to improve city management, maximize taxpayer revenue, troubleshoot areas of concern, and investigate inefficiencies and/or problems in city governance. The Boston Finance Commission was founded in 1909 and is governed by Mass General Law, Chapter 486, Sections 17 through 20. The way I look at our charter, we really have a three-pronged approach. One is through the review of the contracts, which you've heard everybody speak about. Matt and his team really are painstaking in the way they review those contracts. It can trigger different questions that can be followed up either with a phone call or escalated to a Boston Finance Commission meeting. It's really Matt and the team really studies those contracts very well. Then we're an ombudsman. Some would say, oh, whistleblowers call us. People call and say, hey, I saw this going on, I saw that going on. Matt will, in some cases, just solve it through a call. If it seems something more concerning that requires further investigation, he will initiate an investigation, sometimes confidentially at first, and then with greater disclosure. Lastly, as residents of the city, all 5 members are driving around the city, walking on sidewalks, interfacing with government. As you know, in my private job, I'm the head of the Back Bay Association. I'm a resident of West Roxbury. We're all out there looking at city government and how we experience it. My daughter was a Boston Public School student. So it served as for each of us, a personal catch basin to say, hey, I'm seeing this, I'm seeing that, I'm seeing a problem here or there. The most recent one was this paving study that we've been doing. There is a really great makeup of city residents. And this is just the current commission. There have been other commission members. We've had lawyers, we've had consultants, we've had developers. It's small local developers, not big ones. It's really been a privilege to see so closely how the city of Boston works. Everybody laughs, but I do track, since I've been on, I have an Excel spreadsheet of literally everything we've covered. And I do that because I take it very seriously as a commission member, that it's not just our charge to review what's going on, and I could tell you, but it would be too repetitive. I could share this with you if you ever wanted. But to also follow up and ask questions. Okay, we studied the sale of 152 North Street. What ended up happening with that? Or following up on the Olympics. There's a huge focus on the contracts and especially what are the green contracts?
The 25As?
The 25As, because they're so technical. And Matt really understands those and is very often, just like the IG educates city employees if they're not following something. It's not just like, oh, we got you, you didn't follow the procedure. He then goes in and educates the different staff people about how they can better align with the laws. We've met with the school department numerous times talking about their contract practices. It's gotten, at first it was terrible, then it got better, then it's been, recently there have been further discussions. Proactively, we ask for different presentations. The Olympics were mentioned, but also the concern about the Boston Public Schools and where they're located and whether or not there's an equitable distribution of new resources. There's been a lot of focus on the Boston Public School busing, bus contract, not busing, but bus contract that Matt has done a lot of work. It's been better more recently. So the real pitch is that we are here as residents, and we do have 5-year terms that really don't coincide with any terms other than what our end date was. Like, there's even among all of us, I think Richie's in the process of getting renewed, then my term is up. There's just a lot of transition. And it's been a real honor to participate in this way. I've learned a lot. And I would also say, I would be surprised if any members of the City Council even knew that this is something that I was doing, because it is somewhat a low-key role, and Matt really is the face of the organization for the most part. So he's often in the press, and you might read about him, but all of us are there. And by the way, I am the only paid commission member, and I do make $5,000 a year. So I just want to make sure everybody knows that. Anyway, thank you for hearing these comments, and we really do welcome any questions you might have to us individually or collectively.
Very good. Thank you, Matt, Sharice, Richard, for your testimony as well. So I'll throw it out to my colleague, lead sponsor, for start the questioning.
Thank you, and thank you to all of you. And I appreciate, and if this wasn't made abundantly clear in my opening testimonies, the work that you guys do and have always envisioned this proposed ordinance to work in partnership, whether it's with your commission, the FinCom, the state IG, or other departments, right? Any agency that is tasked with ensuring transparency, accountability, investigative responsibilities has to work in collaboration and partnership with other state agencies, local, state, or federal, in order to be effective. I think I'll start with just the state IG, because we talked about this in a previous meeting. The concern around, or I should say my concern, I don't know if it was your concern, around you having to be invited in by departments to do those trainings, to be as proactive as you would like. We talked about BPS, we talked about some departments that you'd like a greater relationship with, some departments that maybe haven't interfaced with the state IG at all. And that invitation cannot come from the council, it can come from the mayor, if he or his administration so chooses, which I think is very different from the proposed setup of this office, and separates the invitation responsibility or privilege, frankly, from the administration to an independent office that is mandated and equipped with the power to go in without invitation, right? So I would love to I think, hear more, and this is what we said to previous, you have thoughts, and I think some really great thoughts on how you, from where you sit, could work in more collaboration, but I did want to put that on the record, that that is a big distinction from what this would call for, outside of the fact that it's here, local, not tasked with every 351 municipalities across the Commonwealth, which I know is a lot, but tasked only to look at the city of Boston. So, but would love for you to share publicly even your thoughts around greater collaboration that could be happening with our departments in your office.
Yeah. So our statute currently does mandate any government entity, whether it be an agency or a municipality, to cooperate with our office. So just to respond to your point, whether it would be a city IG or a state IG, you still have to look at human nature. somebody just showing up and saying, I'm going to do a training, isn't going to go over as well as, listen, here's some things that we can offer you. Here are some areas that we've seen some deficiencies, so we'd like to come in and do this. That's certainly going to go over a lot better than someone just showing up and saying, next Friday we'll be in for a training. Who knows what the attendance is going to be, and what's the enforcement of that when the agency head then says, sorry, I'm not interested. And so I think that's where the collaboration comes in. As for us, we are in a number of municipalities throughout the state. And what I had told you, it was interesting when the new mayor came into Framingham, she had heard about our boards and commissions training, and I think shortly after her inauguration, we had worked it out that we brought in a team to do a training for almost everybody who was on a board or commission in Framingham. Half of them went in the morning and half of them went at night. But that was her vision, to just get more training and get people educated on what their roles were. So that can happen anywhere, but it's when agencies want us there, it's going to have more of a result. And on the other point that I made, that our statute requires cooperation. Listen, I was a prosecutor for a long time, and we go into places and we can, this isn't implied, we will explicitly say this, we can do this the easy way, or we can do this the hard way. And so the easy way is, this is what we're here for. We either have a complaint or whatever it might be. A lot of times things come from hotline calls or whatever it is. We're going to look at this area. So these are the documents we need. Usually we go in and we just ask for things. We might put it in a letter or an email. If there's no cooperation, we have subpoena power. So that's when I say the Red Sox thing, that was litigation. It was, trying to say we don't have to submit to your authority. Well, you do. The BRA did. Now, the Red Sox, in the end, even though they had signed a voluntary demonstration plan in 2002, then things changed in 2013 and said, well, we're a private corporation. You have absolutely no right to get any of our records, which in the end, they didn't share our records. That's why we don't know today how much the Red Sox make at every game on Yawkey Way. But the point is that with state agencies, city agencies, any municipality, they have to submit to our authority. And so we want to do it in a way that's going to be cooperative so that we can have an investigation or a review that uncovers whatever it is we need to uncover to fix whatever problem it is where there's fraud, waste, and abuse.
Was your office involved in anything related to the recent incidents out of the ZBA or the BPDA?
No. And so that, we could have if we knew about it or if someone had contacted us. But, other than the way that it came out, I don't think even an internal agency would have found it, because somebody would have had to pick up the phone to call our agency, just as they would have had to pick up the phone to call an internal IG at the city council.
And we talked about this a little bit too. Do you see any value of having something that is specifically local? And I'll ask Matt the same question. Local in nature versus statewide, tasked with not only tasks affecting the city of Boston, but exclusively responsible for building those relationships with employees, departments, in all of them, so that when they go in, it's not like, who are you, where are you coming from? There's already a rapport and an appetite to work together, regardless of obviously who's in the political space, to ensure that we get these outcomes related to transparency and good governance.
The way to be effective, any IG to be effective needs to be independent, and that's the major issue. And the example that I gave you in our meeting, when we finished our Hinton report, shortly before it came out, we met with the governor. I don't think that's any secret, and wanted to talk about our findings. I think, and the governor probably would say that there were a lot of problems that we found, and I think if we weren't independent, whoever is that we would report to could say, let me see that report. And the final report may not look like what we would consider a final report. Because particularly if it's a political office, they don't want bad information getting out, so they're going to sanitize it and, okay, this is the report we're putting out. And I think that when we're independent, that can't happen. This is the report we're putting out. We weren't told by the governor, because the governor, the AG, or the auditor, they appoint me, they don't supervise me. They can't.
Well, the same would be true for this. The stress is that this office truly be independent, and designing it in such a way that independence is at the forefront. You know, right now we have appointments for key positions, and not to say that there's some bad behavior,
Right.
but our corporation counsel, our city auditor, and certain positions appointed by the mayor with no involvement of the council, which differs from numerous municipalities across the country. So there's a real intentionality that this office not only be at the local level, close and proximate, but also be independent, which I agree with you. If that's not the case, then it's almost useless to even have the conversation.
Right. Well, in terms of doing work locally, number one, we do have the staff, we do have the interest in doing as much as we can locally. So, and in terms of proximity, we are, you know, a walk away, you know, a walk up the hill away. So I think that the availability that we can have, and I appreciate the fact that this has started a conversation that we can have not only with the city council but with the mayor as to how we can work with the city. But I think one of the major things, and you had touched upon this, that I think is really important for an IG's office is the prevention piece of it. And that's being proactive, and that's training. Now, you could start an office and hire some crack investigators who have great experience, maybe former prosecutors or former police or FBI agents that could come in and set up a unit. So you may get the detection piece down, but the prevention piece, as I mentioned, Bob Sarasoli started our training program, I think it was 1996. I really feel like just in the last 7 years that I've been there, we've really perfected that, because we had a model that had been in place for about 15 years. Putting together a training program and curriculum and getting what you need to be able to get out to the agencies, particularly in Boston Public Schools, to train people on procurement, fraud prevention, fraud awareness, fiduciary duty. That's years in the making. Yeah. And so you could tomorrow start an investigative group, but if you want to really have the mandate of a true IG's office, the prevention piece of it, the education part of it is something that is so important, because that gets people being proactive.
No, I
that's
absolutely,
years in the making.
I absolutely agree with you, and I think when we had our conversation, it was definitely around how can a local IG's office work in partnership with you, given the experience and expertise. But we also talked about the challenges of your office getting into BPS to actually be able to do those trainings in a more meaningful and robust way, and the barriers to that happening, and you know, us not necessarily saying come on in. So I want to be very frank and honest about that. But I do think if this office, which should not just be detention or detection, prevention as well, it would be ridiculous if no one sort of connected with you guys on the prevention piece, but had the authority at this level, outside of the administration and the council, to actually ensure that not only BPS gets that training, but every other department. Because one of the things that hasn't really come up is the long range of other policies and procedures that we put in place outside of just financial responsibilities, having to do with equity, fairness, and everything else, where we hear from employees all the time. We have a hearing after this related to systemic bias, not being promoted, other things, policies and procedures that no one is really going into these departments and ensuring that the policies on paper are being implemented in the spirit in which they're written. And none of these offices cover that specifically, which I think is why the scope as defined in the ordinance is broader than FinCom and the IG's office, but with the expectation that this office would work with all of you. So I want to just move to Matt too, before turning over to my colleagues as well for questions, to say, I appreciate the work you guys are doing. Even around, if we wanted to make some changes with respect to the legal structure for FinCom, again, have to go up to the State House. Good luck with that. It's completely challenging to really get a lot of things done there. But I do think there's still value at someone having not just local authority and power like you guys, but being more expansive in their responsibilities, as I just sort of mentioned. And one of the things I wanted to sort of, I guess two things was, were you guys involved at all with the BPDA and the ZBA and all of what happened there? Because that's always at the topic, the top question with respect to folks in the public. But then the second question is, on the prevention and the proactive piece, what departments in the city of Boston does FinCom work with? And how expansive is that?
So we were not part of the ZBA. I will tell you from my personal experience from getting complaints that it seems to me that that was generated specifically by a complaint from somebody on the inside that was given to another agency. That's my own feeling. But it does happen with us as well, where we get these complaints and they tend to go in directions you would not expect. One thing that hasn't been mentioned by our group is that we do have subpoena powers as well. We generally don't activate them because the threat of the subpoena powers is pretty much enough to get what we need, but it is there if we need it. I would tell you this, from my experience of being here, looking at like the departments, one of the things I've always advocated is for procurement, to streamline procurement. We've got police and fire and school department, and the turnover rate leads to, you lose that kind of intrinsic value of knowledge of how to do things, and when things get stuck, how to get it done. I find a lot of times people just have to get it done. They may be overwhelmed because there aren't enough people in the department and the contracts go out incorrect. I think there's a lot of value in taking Glenn's courses. I have to tell you, it's eye-opening and really informative. You meet other procurement specialists around the state. You have access to resources you wouldn't have otherwise. And I'd highly recommend the city make it a mandate for anybody coming in the door. The challenges you're facing right now is the economy is fantastic, so the turnover rate is huge. And school department is probably one of the biggest challenges for us right now. They have the biggest budget, they have the most contracts, they also have a lot of turnover, and that leads us to a lot of problems. Our approach has been to simply call, try to figure out where the problem's arising, and offer opportunities for them to get education and learn the system better. I think one of the things I found in this administration in particular is that there's a lot of people willing to cooperate. And the changes are much more done more fast and more effectively if we go in the door and say, you made a mistake, let's fix it. Sometimes we don't have that ability because it's criminal or it appears criminal or it's beyond the scope of being able to say, let's just fix it and move forward. And at that point, we write a report. We'll contact the members sit down, they guide us. We contact some people and try to fix it. I think that one of the things I would highly recommend is that at this point, if somewhere down the road there's an issue that you feel or any other member of the council feels needs to be looked at, we're available for that. We operate our own website to make sure we maintain our independence. No one's telling me what to put out there and what not to put out there. We do annual reports every year so people know what we're doing. We put articles and reports on that website. I grant that it's not sexy and exciting for a lot of people. It is for me. I have no life. But I think it's informative. But I always, any opportunity to meet people in the departments, we go in every department. We're in property management. We're in the parks department. We just reviewed actually signage, and some of the, 4 of the parks in the city are under agreements with private educational institutions. And one of the complaints I got was that there's so much signage going up that the citizens of Boston don't think it's a city park anymore. And we are getting money for it. There's money going to the city coffers, but it has to be known that this is not a sold property. This is something that certain times of the day you may not have access, but the park's taken care of. So those minor issues become bigger issues when taxpayers are putting the money in and not having the ability to use those parks and not feeling comfortable using them. So I think a lot of it's education. I think you're speaking to it exactly. It's education. It's letting people know what's out there. I think streamlining the processes and having fewer people with higher education on what they're doing. But I do think there's a huge value in continuing education in the city, and especially with the employees, with some of the citizens should be allowed to come into these systems so they can know. Our next meeting is on November 20th. We've asked the office, the Small Business Office, to come in to speak to us about the MWBE contracts and how we're going to try to increase those values. I think there's a lot of opportunity for people to learn and to be a part of the change. And I mean, let's face it, the numbers aren't great. I mean, we look at the unadvertised contracts. One of the things we said was, let's give me a definitive idea of what an MWBE business is. If there's 3 legal people that own a firm and one person is a minority, is that an MWBE business or is it not? Those minor details add up to, you may think it's one thing, I might think it's another. I can't find that information anywhere. But I'm willing to partner with the city. We all want to partner with the city and learn, educate ourselves, and sit here in front of you and say, we're doing better. And I think there's a big value to that, but it's getting the information out there and all of us working cooperatively to get that information out there.
Thank you, Matt.
Chair recognizes City Councilor Matt O'Malley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Madam President, for your leadership on this. And of course, thank you for all of you, particularly of those who do it for little or no money with your volunteer. And I know at least 2 of you well. Proud to call you constituents. Great to meet you as well, Councilor. And thank you for clearly your love for the city and oversight, gentlemen, as well. I support the efforts of what the Council President is trying to do here, and I think, I understand some concern about duplication of efforts or having too many cooks in the kitchen, so to speak, but I think there's an opportunity to provide more avenues for the population of the city and beyond. I've talked about having something more along the lines of a public advocate, which is an elected independent position in New York City, or a city ombudsman to help, and I think that is something that could go nicely with this. So I applaud you, Madam President, and I look forward to continuing to support this as we continue through the process. I guess I just had some more sort of perfunctory questions, particularly as it relates to FinCom. Richie, I think you mentioned that one example about a school contract where just because the vendor had asked more money, the city was paying that money, or one of you may have, and sort of, oh, Matt, I'm sorry, you did your remarks. So thank you for sticking up for the taxpayer in that case, but what was the issue in purchasing at the city's level that caused that? I mean, don't we have a very robust RFP process, sort of oversight, purchase? How did we drop the ball there as a city?
So it's not it's an unadvertised contract. So it's a vendor that had a special education background and which is exempt from 30B. My feeling in going in and speaking to the manager in the department was that the person was a relatively new person. The people who had experience had gone to another job, and there just wasn't the experience to get all the contracts done, so they just started paying it. And I think it was misinformation, miscommunication, and lack of training. Right now, it's probably at the biggest time I've ever seen a problem with this because of the economy.
Yeah.
But just not that value of having somebody who knows their job is tough. And other administrations and municipalities want these people, and they can make a little more money and maybe not have to drive in the city if they're not residents. I think it's education and training. I really do. And one of the things we had said multiple times over the course of the last few years has been that we'd like to see the purchasing department take up a lot of these purchasing functions. I don't think the police should be in the business of purchasing. I think they do a job. Maybe those purchasing people come with their knowledge and work at City Hall to purchase those items. But a lot of it's the same stuff, paper and pencils. Some of it may be, school supplies. You can have someone with that particular skill set. And I think there's a lot of value to centralizing it all. I just think you gain that knowledge. You've got the people next to you who have experience you can go to and ask them. When you've got people who don't know what they're doing and they're trying to get the job done and they're getting yelled at by their boss, they're just trying to get a contract out the door.
No, I mean, I think it's clear there was no nefarious behavior here. It really was just someone that didn't understand, but I think it underscores the importance of hearings like this and work like this and sort of the public awareness of your role. So you guys meet monthly as a board, and do members of the public often come? Is it mostly just board members?
There have been times with a topic that's more popular, more people come, like the Olympics. There were quite a few people in the audience for that.
Yeah.
I think we also studied the Grand Prix. I think there were some folks for that. There was a person who came to every meeting, and I think he passed away. We meet monthly. It's at 5 p.m. It's at the
Hawkins Street.
Hawkins
43
Street.
Hawkins Street, the Curly Room.
Okay. And is it on public access or on the City of Boston cables? It's televised or streamed?
It's difficult to do it trying to maintain independence, but we certainly could talk about that. And we can certainly stream it through our own systems as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or I wonder even using some of the facilities here that just are probably better equipped for that. And how much of your work is reactive as opposed to proactive? What I mean by that is I'm sure it's a lot of contracts oversight. Obviously, the larger the contract, the more so you're going to focus on, although you guys do a lot of good work, versus sort of complaint-driven. In other words, so talk a little bit about sort of the split in what you focus on.
So I know this sounds strange, but it's the makeup of the commission as well. This commission tends to want to be more proactive. So generally speaking, I get a lot of things from the contracts and complaints. You follow them through, you never know where you're going to go, and it never goes in a straight line. This commission has been really focused on quality of life issues for taxpayers, so hence the paving. It's a lot of work. It's 9 months of going out into the field and trying to find street cuts. But I think the value of it is this. It changes things. When you start asking the questions, the changes start happening. Whether you're going to find something bad or wrong or something could be done better, the changes happen. So within 9 months, we started asking questions about the paving issues, and they were very helpful, really helpful in getting this done. But I also think the resources aren't there for them to do it. So for us to do it, we can bring ourselves out there in the cold weather and find out. And when they find out some of the things we're bringing back to them, we share it. It's public information. We'll share it with anybody. They start making changes that are meaningful. The same thing with the contracts. When you start pointing out problems, the changes start happening. If the contract's coming in late, they start coming in a little earlier because you're pointing it out. So there's just a value in asking a question. But right now, I would tell you that this commission is extremely proactive. They want to look at things that are going to make a difference to the taxpayers and the citizens of the city, and they want to take a look at things that maybe the city doesn't have the time or the resources to look at, and that's fine. It's actually worked out great, and we love doing that kind of work because it really makes a difference.
If I could just add, I would say it's probably about 2 to 3 calls per month where someone calls and Matt looks into it. Sometimes it really goes to nothing.
Sure.
Sometimes it can be like, I think he went out and investigated someone using city water for a Zamboni ice contract in City Hall Square. There's one of the beauties, and you see this, I'm sure, every day in your occupation, just the variety of different things that concern people. We get calls from residents. We've gotten calls from people who submitted bids for contracts, didn't get it, questioning why that happened. Again, some of it is more confidential until it escalates to the point where there's a need for further exploration. Sure. There was a call about the school equipment in the Boston Public Schools where someone was, you could explain what happened.
We worked with Glenn with that, actually. We got a call from a vendor who stated that they were being, procurement officer at the school department was telling them essentially that if they didn't offer them credits, send fake invoices in to offer credits, that they were going to drop their contract. So we started researching it, and it got to a certain point where we thought there might be criminal behavior. I'm not a police officer. I contacted Glenn's office. Glenn's office, and by the way, saying he's a block away, he's not lying. He was within like a day, he was in the office with a crew, with a police officer, and we just shared the information with them. At some point, the employee was let go from the city of Boston. But the access to the bank records and everything else is not within our realm, but it's within the police realm. So things like that happen. I mean,
But I just wonder if I may add, Mr. Chairman, through you to the maker, it would be in the realm of this position.
That's right.
So that's just sort of an interesting point to sort of understand that Glenn certainly has power and oversight positions that FinCom wouldn't. So
I think at some point you start dealing with the legal matter, and that will go beyond any department you'll find. I mean, I've got to be honest. When we start having any question of legalities, there is no value to me keeping it in-house or trying to keep a secret. You go to the authorities, and that's what we did, and that's what we will continue to do.
Absolutely, and if I have this right, and Glenn, thank you for your work. among the titles I've had, I was a Ward Fellow, and I'm still involved with a program named after John William Ward, who was an absolute legend in this Commonwealth and someone who you know, it just has left such a rich legacy. So really appreciate your continuing his work. You have sort of oversight. If I have it right, FinCom would focus not solely because you, and through your incredibly talented membership, have worked on more quality of life issues and sort of experiencing it in larger scale Olympics to sidewalks, but if there were any potential wrongdoing that would, and it was brought to your attention, Matt, you would have to send it to the authorities, probably start with Glenn if it were somehow financially related or government related, and then go to the authorities.
I don't think it's a have to. Legally, I feel like I have to go to the authorities.
Of course.
I feel a strong confidence in Glenn and in the fact of his office. You know, he's a rock star too.
Yeah.
So when you're doing very similar work, it's always best to go to somebody and say to them, "I've got this.
Yeah.
You know, what do you think?" And if Glenn's better suited to take it, then take it. If you're going to get this done quicker and with some expedience. We do have situations where things like this come up that, like the other day, I called the Pioneer Institute because I was working on something and I respect Greg and Jim. And I said, you know, I want to bounce this off somebody because sometimes you get so bogged down in it, it's hard for me to relate it to you.
Yeah.
So I called them and I just said, you know, this is what I'm experiencing. What do you think? And I think that Glenn is that person to me as well.
Sure.
I respect him immensely in the work he does. So when I think there's any question that it might go beyond where I'm feeling comfortable, I'm gonna go call Glenn. It's just the way it's gonna be.
Good. Glenn, does every state have an inspector general?
No. So I think at this point, there's probably 12 states that have statewide inspector generals. But then there are states that, within states where there are either by department. You know, California doesn't have a state inspector general, but there are inspector generals in corrections or education or where it might be. So, and then, you know, the federal government really has a network of inspector generals throughout the government. But in terms of statewide, it's very small, and then you might have certain cities that have inspector generals, or counties.
Are there any cities, like I know Chicago has one, I don't know if Illinois has one. Are there any cities or states that have an IG, and then large cities and under them that have an IG as well?
Well, New York.
Okay.
Yeah, but I think the biggest inspector general office probably is New York City, which has a big structure. It's called the commissioner. It's a commission, and then there's IGs under the commissioner.
And that's separate from the public advocate in
That's
New
right.
York City. Is that an elected position, or is that appointed as well?
It's appointed by the mayor. And so then you have like a place like Chicago. So you have a Cook County IG, as well as a Chicago IG, as well as an Illinois IG. So talk about overlaps. But the Illinois IG is a very small office. But between Cook County and the Chicago IG, I'm sure they have to try to work out jurisdictional issues.
Understood. Good. All right. That's all for now. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all.
Thank you. And Matt, just want to put something on your radar. At some point, we'll talk about the structure over the police department where you have captain detectives, lieutenant detectives, and sergeant detectives, supervising detectives, despite the fact that there's never been detectives. So I think sort of organizationally, there's something a little upside down about that. So it then becomes all about the rating, and to get the rating, and obviously the salary benefits from that. So I think that there's something a little broken there that may be worth having a discussion with you and obviously the administration and our police department just to identify it. In a perfect world, you would love to have officers get through basic training, be on the job for a period of time, and then at some point make a career decision if they want to go sort of the sergeant, lieutenant, captain route, or do they want to go the detective route. I'm not sure we have that luxury. I know that we're understaffed, given, as you can see from overtime figures and the fact that many of our police districts, men and women of the police department, are being ordered in or ordered to stay when they're on the job. So it speaks to sort of a bigger issue. But I guess in a perfect situation, we'd want to have a breakdown like that so that if you go the detective route and you get the detective training, then you would rate for a sergeant detective, a lieutenant detective, and a captain detective. You've been a detective, you have the detective training, you're now supervising detectives. That's not how it works right now. We have a system where you're not a detective, you've never been a detective, but you get a captain detective, lieutenant detective, or sergeant detective rating, and you're now in a position to be supervising detectives, and I think it just breeds, I don't know, talk to the, I don't know, I have not, just call Detective so-and-so, he'll figure it out, or, and I want to make sure we're having a system that is fair, it's not sort of political patronage, it's not about whose sign you held and, you know, whose event you went to.
Certainly,
And
certainly
I think
take a
there's a
look
real,
at that.
I think there's a real cost savings in that as well, particularly if you have superior officer detectives, supervising detectives, and they've actually never been a detective themselves, it's a little upside down, so.
Yeah,
Didn't want to take
absolutely.
away from this, but while we're on the subject of efficiencies and in areas where it would make some sense, overall, we're struggling with, you know, being able to put more officers on the street, which drives up overtime and forces our local captains to have to order men and women in or to have them stay longer, and it's never a good situation when we're taxing municipal employees to the extent that we are with our police officers. So I understand that's sort of a bigger issue, but I think organizationally there's a breakdown there that may be worth you taking a peek at and see if we can work together to try to make that change, so. And I know that we've been joined by my colleague Lydia Edwards. Any questions at this point, Councilor? You have the floor? No? Very good. So I appreciate the time and attention of this panel. I know we have another panel. I see PM Coker is here, and the two gentlemen that have joined us by phone, you're welcome, Inspector General and folks from FinCom, to stay if you want to, and we also will probably have some public testimony as well, but appreciate your time and attention, and obviously the value you add to the hearing, but also what you guys do in your capacity as Inspector General and on the FinCom. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Pam, if you could make your way down, and we're also at this time going to be introducing David Harper, who's part of the Association of Inspector Generals, as well as Douglas Jones, who's the city auditor of the city of Kansas City, Missouri. So both Doug and David, are you still on with us?
This is David, yes, I am.
Very good, David.
This is Doug, I'm here.
Very good, Doug. Well, welcome to the Boston City Council hearing on docket 1337, ordinance establishing the Office of Inspector General in the City of Boston. And while I have both of your time and attention, if you could just state, we'll start with David, if you could just state your name and affiliation for the record, and you have the floor to give us your thoughts on this legislation, then that'll be followed by Douglas Jones, and then we're going to go to the guest that's here with us, who's the president of the Boston Municipal Research Bureau, and that's PM Coker. So, Dave, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair Flaherty and committee members. Again, my name is David Harper. I'd like to thank you for this opportunity to speak at your committee hearing on docket number 1337 to address the proposed ordinance establishing an Office of Inspector General within the City of Boston. I've submitted via email a written testimony. It's a little more expansive than my verbal comments. I will make a statement and then I'm prepared to answer any questions. I am speaking today as a private citizen with considerable experience in the IG community at all levels of government. I'd like to be clear, I'm not representing any government, any agency, or any association. Regarding my background, I've been an IG for the state of Florida since August of 2018, and I was the IG for the city of Albuquerque from 2016 to 2018. Prior to that, I was in federal law enforcement with the Air Force Office of Special Investigations for 35 years. The OSI is established within the IG community at the federal level, falling under the Air Force Inspector General and under the Department of Defense Inspector General for policy and oversight. My most recent federal positions included being the Chief of Economic Crimes at the headquarters for OSI near Washington, D.C., and prior to that I was a special agent in charge of the OSI office located near Boston at Hanscom Air Force Base. I'm a certified Inspector General, certified fraud examiner, and a certified financial crime investigator. I believe in strong oversight when it comes to spending the public's money. That is why I have dedicated my entire adult life to the pursuit of deterring, detecting, and investigating fraud, abuse, and corruption at all levels of government. Regarding a municipal IG, I believe an OIG established by a city ordinance is stronger than an OIG established by an executive order, as was the case in Baltimore until recently, as is currently the case in the city of Philadelphia. But an OIG that's established in a city charter provides the greatest protection for independence and objectivity, as is currently in Baltimore. An independent and objective OIG is essential to having the credibility and the trust of the public, the elected leaders and the appointed leaders, and often, frankly, all public servants within city government. I believe the OIG should have a proactive role in major acquisitions that would include review of proposed contractual language to ensure minimal opportunity to perpetrate fraud within contracts and grants. I firmly believe in consistency, uniformity, and accountability of oversight of agencies. Therefore, I believe a governing ordinance should include a section on standards for the office. I'm speaking to the OIG standards, such as AIG's Green Book, IIA's Red Book, or GAO's Yellow Book. GAO being the Government Accountability Office, arm of Congress. Such standards are important for credibility and trust. I believe there needs to be constant accountability of the IG office. No one should be unchecked when doing the work of the people with their resources. I also believe a periodic peer review of both the investigations and audit functions of the agency should be accomplished by a third party, such as the AIG or the AIG and the IAA or other entities. This helps strengthen an agency's credibility and ensures accountability and effectiveness. This should be accomplished about every 3 years. I believe in strong whistleblower protections, but also clearly established criteria on defining a whistleblower. This could be done through an elaborate section in an OIG ordinance or in a separate ordinance, as was the case when I was in Albuquerque. I'm an advocate for transparency, which is, to me, key to credibility. Therefore, I believe in an OIG which should issue periodically a public report that includes a section on metrics, such as the number of investigations and audits, as well as the quantifiable value of these accomplishments in terms of savings, cost avoidance, and recoveries of funds and resources. In addition to a periodic public report, I believe an OIG should publicly post reports, such as audit reports and redacted or summarized investigative reports. Again, transparency is essential to the public trust. There will be times for confidentiality purposes that those reports will, like I say, be heavily redacted, or sometimes a decision not to post them. Otherwise, I think it's important to post them. I firmly believe a strong IG enhances trust and confidence in a government by the community and can bolster deterrence and detection of misconduct, wrongdoing, fraud, waste, and abuse of government resources. I also believe a proactively engaged IG will identify opportunities to improve efficiencies and opportunities to become better stewards of public resources through audits, strong relationships with elected and appointed leaders, other public servants, and the public through interaction at public meetings, such as council meetings and other maybe neighborhood association meetings, as I did in Albuquerque. In recent history, several local municipalities have established OIGs or are considering them. The citizens of Baltimore recently voted to incorporate the OIG into the city charter. Atlanta, as we speak, is exploring the establishment of an OIG. Seattle created an IG last year specifically for the police department. Miami Beach recently established an OIG. I believe this momentum at the local level will lead to the perception that protecting the public's trust and tax dollar is one of the highest priorities. There are several states that have IGs, as you guys were just discussing, at both the local and state level. Most of those situations include a state-level IG that generally has authority to investigate and audit only state agencies, as is the case here in the state of Florida. Unlike many state-level OIGs, I do understand that the Massachusetts OIG has broader authority to audit and investigate at all levels of government. This is not unlike situations where you may have local law enforcement and state law enforcement, or even federal law enforcement, where there might be overlapping authority and jurisdictions. Situations like this would need to be coordinated between the agencies to avoid unnecessary duplication of effort and unintentional impact of each other's work. Having said that, in my federal law enforcement career, I found advantages in having multiple organizations involved with investigations, including the fact additional agencies could be a force multiplier, and certain agencies might understand the internal mechanics and personalities of an organization and have unique skills that together provide a comprehensive capability. Even as the Albuquerque IG, I jointly worked with a federal IG on a matter concerning federal grant funds that weren't properly spent. The joint effort proved to be invaluable. Finally, the New Mexico State Auditor had authority when I was there, still does, at all levels of government. And they conducted an audit of a matter that I was investigating. We actually initiated the investigation, but I coordinated with the state auditor on most things that I started. And in that case there, they actually opened up a separate audit, but we coordinate throughout the process. So they had access to what we were developing as we were developing it. Our advantage in that situation was that we had already established rapport built within the organization with the people. We knew the ordinance as well. We knew the policies, and we knew the internal structure. This concludes my verbal testimony, and I'm open to any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much,
Very good. Thank you, Dave. And Douglas, are you with us?
Yes, I am. Council President Campbell, Chairman Flaherty, members of the Government Operations Committee, my name's Doug Jones, and I'm the City Auditor for Kansas City, Missouri. I have about 30 years of auditing experience, most of that in government. I am a certified government auditing professional, certified internal auditor, and I have a certificate in risk management assurance. I am also the chair of the Association of Local Government Auditors Advocacy Committee. So I do want to thank you for inviting me to speak with you today on the proposal to establish an independent inspector general position in Boston. I'm speaking today on behalf of the Advocacy Committee as its chair, and I will keep my comments brief as Mr. Harper covered a lot of things that I believe that we are in alignment with. The Association of Local Government Auditors represents almost 300 government audit organizations and is committed to strengthening and supporting independent auditing in local governments. The primary value of an independent audit or inspector general function is that they can play a key role in effective governance and public accountability and transparency. An independent audit function also provides assurance to elected officials, residents, and management that resources are protected by strong management controls and practices, reports on the results and outcomes of programs and services, and helps ensure compliance with laws, policies, and procedures. An inspector general function may focus more on investigations into matters related to fraud, waste, or abuse, and manage a jurisdiction's hotline for complaints related to ethics, fraud, waste, or abuse issues. ALGO does have a member organization that is a city auditor's office that primarily conducts performance audits, but they also have an investigative arm. We also have another member that is an inspector general office that has a primary focus on investigations, but also conducts performance audits. So generally, the audit and investigative work are different from the annual financial audit that is performed by the city or jurisdiction's external financial auditor. The benefits from an independent auditor or inspector general function include public accountability and transparency, identification and ongoing deterrence of fraud, waste, and abuse, reduced or avoided costs, increased revenues, improved city services, the ability to raise awareness about internal controls and risk areas, information for decision-making, and improved management controls over public monies and assets. I do agree that standards are important. We follow the government auditing standards. We're a government agency, so we think following the government auditing standards by the GAO is a very good thing. There's also standards for IG. So that does conclude my brief comments. Like I said, Mr. Harper covered a lot of things that we believe in: accountability, transparency, following standards, having a peer review done. Those are all very important things to help maintain an independent and objective function. So with that, I'll stand for questions.
Very good. Thank you, Douglas, as well. And does any of my colleagues have any questions right now of both David or Douglas? We can.
No, this is Councilor Campbell, and thank you, Dave and Doug, for joining us. Really appreciate it. You guys have such incredible experience and insight and have been helpful even before the hearing, so thank you. I don't have questions. I was really taking a lot of notes, and we'll follow up, with respect to specific questions around language and best practices, but really wanted your testimony on the record for those who are either watching or participating or taking an interest in this, and who can't obviously maybe participate in person. So thank you both for joining us and staying on the call, listening to the conversation, and continuing to be partners in the discussion. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
If my colleagues don't have any...
David, you're welcome.
Very good. If my colleagues don't have any additional questions of David or Douglas now. So you're free to continue to stay on the line, or if you have other things that warrant your attention, you're more than welcome to end the call.
And there is one more panelist, just to be clear.
And I've got to go attend a council meeting in Kansas City. So
Very
again,
good.
thank you. If
Very
you have
good.
any questions, give me a call, send me an email. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you both. Thank you. Pam, great to see you.
Yes.
Welcome back, President of the Municipal Research Bureau. If you could just state your name and affiliation for the record, and then you have the floor, and give us your thoughts on this proposal.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Chairman and committee members, my name is Pam Coker. I am the president of the Boston Municipal Research Bureau. I am also a city resident. Thank you for this opportunity to speak to Docket 1337, the proposal to establish an Office of the Inspector General in the city of Boston. The Research Bureau applauds the City Council's commitment to prevent, detect, and correct fraud, waste, and abuse in city government. However, the Research Bureau believes the proposed approach of creating a City of Boston Office of Inspector General is unnecessary to meet that mission. The resources to meet that mission are already available, as we've heard, through the State Inspector General's Office, which plays a key role in addressing fraud, waste, and abuse in cities and towns, not just in state government, and has an expert understanding of city government policy and procedures, both current and what best practices would be, as well as a keen awareness of city and town functions that are more typically prone to be problematic. Boston has availed itself of those resources a number of times, including in recent years. As Inspector General Kuna mentioned in his testimony, the IG also engages with local governments, including Boston, with education, training, best practices, and procedures to prevent fraud, waste, and abuse. He in particular noted over 300 city and town employees, specifically City of Boston employees, have been trained by his unit. The proposed ordinance expresses an interest in an independent inspector general. Continued use of the state IG office and resources would ensure independence more than a city IG, appointed by an advisory board whose appointees can be selected by appointed and elected city officials. The proposed ordinance indicates a preference for a city IG rather than bringing in costly outside counsel to address issues as they arise. Note that the State Inspector General's services and resources are free to Boston and all other Massachusetts communities. Establishing a city IG office would duplicate resources already available in the state IG office, requiring key staff to do the work, including not only the IG position itself, but also most likely include attorneys, forensic accountants, and other investigators, as well as highly secure confidential data systems. The ordinance calls for funding for a city IG at a minimum amount equal to 0.01% of total city departmental appropriations, excluding certain fixed costs, assessments, and other non-departmental or reserve funds. This amount, based on the city's 2020 budget, would be about $265,000, an amount unlikely to be sufficient to meet the mission of standing up a city IG office with all the powers and abilities of the State Inspector General. We heard earlier the FinCom has 3 employees, I believe, and about a $300,000 budget. So that's another benchmark. And the State Inspector General's office has a history of partnering on city matters to address and prevent waste, fraud, and abuse in city government, including the City of Boston. Inspector Kuna mentioned several examples, and I would add one: an investigation into misuse or abuse of vehicle handicap placards. That investigation was done in the City of Boston, and it resulted in a 2017 state law to strengthen enforcement and reduce misuse of those handicap placards. In summary, the Research Bureau strongly recommends the city would be best served by continuing to utilize the State Inspector Office as the resource for addressing and preventing waste, fraud, and abuse in city government. And a couple of additional just sort of comments based on what we've heard this afternoon. It sounds as if there's a couple of different missions that are of interest here. Particularly President Campbell mentioned investigatory and making sure policies and procedures are implemented. And that brings to mind a couple of things. The Inspector General for the state has come into BPS, although it sounds like at times there's concerns about their access, and has reviewed BPS procedures and policies. In one case, it was particularly related to textbook procurement, and has found that BPS did not follow its own procedures and policies. So I certainly want to recognize that there are some challenges around that. As I think about policy and procedure implementation in the city, of course, it's the department head's responsibility to make sure that's happening, and they report to cabinet secretaries, and ultimately it is the mayor. But I certainly respect that there may be some interest in another opportunity to have a presence and pressure on ensuring those policies and procedures are implemented. One thing that comes to mind in particular is a conversation that was held in this chamber, I believe during a budget hearing last spring, and the subject was the Boston Fire Department budget. And I believe there also ended up being, as part of that conversation, a conversation about Boston Fire Department's either slowness to implement policies and procedures, or failure to do so, or failure to come through on executing those and enforcing them. So I'm just noting that that was a conversation that was created because of the role the City Council has in budget hearings, and it led to that kind of conversation. So it does sound as if there's more to be done or to think about doing in terms of best practices for policies and procedures, and making sure those are being taken care of as they should be for the benefit of the city and all of its employees. Thank you very much for your time.
Good. Thank you, Pam, for the work that you do and for joining us today. Any questions of my colleagues?
No, thank you, Pam, for joining us. And I think the additional layers that you added, particularly referencing the fire department, you know, and I know Councilor Edwards cares deeply about this as well, we are, of course, strong advocates, and it's important that we have the conversation, but then where I can only speak for myself, get frustrated is at what point do we go beyond the conversation? The state IG's office, FinCom, goes nowhere near that. So if this state office, or sorry, local office can do that, which they can, that's critically important. And that's just one example. There are many departments where these issues of promotions or lack of fairness come up, where an IG's office could work with the hearing we're about to have after this one with respect to systemic bias, a commission on that, to make sure it doesn't just stay as a conversation. The thing about the IG, and he mentioned this as well, is, you know, they've trained some employees, but I think in the city of Boston it was about 30. Which is not nearly enough, and part of it was their frustration around being able to go into departments to do that in a meaningful way. The law firm piece is critical to me, particularly around public investigation. Right now, the person who has the authority to determine when we're going to do an investigation, how much we're going to pay an external law firm, is not the state IG or FinCom. And so this office could play a role in that, along with other commissions we're contemplating at the local level. One of the things I thought was really critical that Dave spoke about in his experience as a federal inspector general and working at other levels is the value and advantages of sometimes having these offices at local levels when they do coordinate and work in partnership, which wasn't addressed by any of the previous panelists. And I think part of it is, well, you know, we don't want them to feel as though we're taking away their power, and there are some folks who don't want this to happen, and well, God bless them. But there are advantages, and we've learned of great examples where several offices where it's clear around coordination and joint efforts is really valuable. I think local level, having an office that is close in proximity, equipped and designed to proactively show up every single day, looks very different than the state IG, whose responsibility has to do with 350 municipalities, even though they're in Boston. And so I think even with your testimony, there is, I'm more convinced than ever, frankly, that this office is critically important, but particularly around the policies, the scope of work that it is designed to do versus what FinCom is limited to, and where the state IG has shown up. I think there's more for this office that could be really advantageous to everyone. with respect to transparency, accountability, implementation of policies that are often really great on paper but don't show up in practice, and other ways we could envision this office truly being independent, serving a role to work in partnership with our employees, not as sort of a watchdog figure. So I just wanted to add that, but thank you for being here and testifying. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Council. My colleague, Council Lydia Edwards.
Thank you. Yes, I would say I'm probably more convinced from the testimony. When you brought up the Boston Fire Department specifically, one of the arguments for this ordinance is that it costs a lot of money to have independent counsel do the investigation. And so in that case, we did have independent counsel, and it looks like in every single case, we go and get outside counsel to look at, to investigate. So it would seem that it's actually more cost effective, because we didn't ask the state, the State Commission to come in and look at this, or to look at those, I think it's the 4th report we've done now on the Boston Fire Department. So it seems it's actually more cost effective to have a standing independent place that holds institutional memory, would have all 4 reports there from the Boston Fire Department, and could be monitoring the success or failures in an independent way regardless of the administration. I don't know.
I would say that the Inspector General's office has that same institutional history and the reports and is available. I do, as we talk about this, particularly with policy and procedure implementation, you might want to think, in fact, about perhaps bifurcating what you're looking to do. At some level, the State Inspector General's office is so well equipped and prepared to address in a very heavy investigative way, if necessary, issues that come up for cities and towns as well as the state. But there may be something in particular about enforcement around policies and procedures or implementing those in the city that might be a more day-to-day engagement that you may wish to find a way to do in the city. I'm not advocating specifically for that, but I just see the possibility of a conversation about 2 different needs, perhaps, or things that could be split up, where one is maybe more intensive but maybe more rarely used and requires a certain level of expertise, and the other, which could be, as I said, a day in and day out operation.
But just to make sure I'm clear about the opposition of the municipal board, it's that it would be duplicative. Is that the major argument?
That's part of it, yes. And that's certainly a key point as we look at city and state resources.
Right. But in terms of any injury or any harm that having extra eyes or extra investigation or an independent person would have, did you have any argument, did the municipal board have any arguments about harms that it would cause?
We can't speak to injury and harm specifically. That's not something that I mentioned in my testimony. But I do continue to believe that the State Inspector General's office is clearly more independent than any body that the city would institute, because the State Inspector General is not appointed by people who are appointed by city officials, including appointed and elected officials in the administration and city council.
And I think that makes sense. I disagree. I think, want to be clear though, that you mean it would just be more independent because it's not appointed or politicians have nothing to do with it? Is that, I guess I'm trying to figure out where the independence is coming from. How do the state commissioners get their jobs? They're appointed by the governor.
They're appointed by the governor.
So a politician and their political influence hits their level, I guess.
I personally see it as a step removed from the advisory board and the city council roles that they are expected to play in the ordinance 1337.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to add one point that came up towards the end is, I think there's, and then following up on Councilor Edwards' point, tremendous value in the realms being combined. So while I take your point, I think it should all be housed in one place. The department has financial responsibilities, obviously, but these other responsibilities in terms of equity, transparency, accountability, fairness, all the other policies are equally important. And so the question is, how do you go into a department to make sure everyone is trained, equipped, and do it in such a way where you're not navigating whether the state IG can come in or not? Because although he may not be appointed at this level, politics can get involved with anything. And we've seen that even at the, whether it's a state body or not, when you have the power of, frankly, the city of Boston and a strong mayor city being able to have some influence. That's abundantly clear. And if it isn't to folks, well, then they should open their eyes. And so I think for us, this is an opportunity for us to bring in a council, which is obviously an elected body, more members, but also the public, like we did with the CPA, which I think there's tremendous value in that. And I think we misspoke about the appointment of somebody. So let's correct that for the record. Thank you again, Pam.
Very good.
Thank you, Councilor.
Right there. Right there.
The microphone.
Okay.
Just the microphone.
Yep. Yeah, that mic is live. If you can just introduce yourself, state your name and affiliation for the record.
Natalie Monroe, I'm the First Assistant Inspector General.
Very good. Thank you,
you're
Natalie,
welcome.
for being here.
I just wanted to clarify one point. The Inspector General is appointed by a majority vote of the Governor, the State Auditor, and the State Attorney General. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, First Assistant. Thank you, Pam. That concludes the second panel. And I see Victor Braun. We're going to go to public testimony. Victor Braun is here in person to offer some testimony. Welcome. Good to see you again, Victor. And you have the floor. If you just state your name and neighborhood and affiliation for the record.
Thank you, Chairman Flaherty, President Campbell, and especially my district councilor, Edwards. My name is Victor Branya. I'm a 66-year resident of Boston. That is not my entire life, but a long time. And I'm a 26-year resident of the North End, where I am active in community affairs. I'm here to make 3 points. The first two brief, and the second one I hope will not be too lengthy. The first one is I support the ordinance establishing the Office of Inspector General within the City of Boston. I must admit that I haven't read the ordinance because I just received it when I came in today. So some of the comments I make may not be conjoined to the text, but if that's so, I apologize. The second point I want to make is let us make sure that there is overlapping jurisdiction over the Boston Redevelopment Authority. That is, we would not want the BRA not to cooperate with the City Inspector General by saying the State Inspector General has exclusive jurisdiction. So I urge that that be addressed as we proceed. And the third point I want to make is to challenge, we've heard the words policies and procedures, challenge the policies and procedure of the State Inspector General, who unfortunately has left, although I guess someone from the office is still here. And that is on the question of confidentiality. And I'd like to start a conversation about that based upon an experience that I had with the State Inspector General's office. I called the office with a concern about a matter that I was considering making a complaint about, and I had a fine conversation with the person who identified himself as an inspector. As a special investigator, I'm sorry. I then filed a complaint by email, and the response I got was, thank you for filing a complaint, but we will not be able to inform you of what action we take regarding your complaint. I sent an email back to him saying, this may simply be a self-imposed requirement of silence, since 930 CMR 3.01 parenthesis 6 states in part, the Commission may in its discretion provide information regarding the disposition of a complaint to the complainant, subject to the confidentiality requirements of Mass General Laws, Chapter 268B, Section 3, parenthesis G. I went on to say that since I am not a person subject to the state conflict of interest law who has requested an advisory opinion, the qualifying reference above to Section 3, parenthesis G, is inapplicable to my complaint and the matters I have raised. So unless I missed something, I don't see why the Inspector General said that confidentiality is required by statute broadly, which is the way he stated it. If I'm wrong, I'd like to know. So I hope perhaps the person from the Inspector General's office is still here and can correct me. The reason I say this is because as a complainant, I wanted to know what happened to my complaint. A few months later, sent another email, may I have a status report? Thank you. The reply was, thank you for your note. The commission is required by state law to maintain confidentiality with respect to et cetera, et cetera. Thus, I cannot by law provide a status update. Why not? Is it to protect the whistleblower? Well, I was a whistleblower and didn't want protection. I had filed after that, a comment letter with the agency that I had filed a complaint about, which would be a public document. I wanted to start a conversation about what I thought was an unethical procedure being proposed. I didn't want confidentiality. Is it to prevent, perhaps, or protect against libel and slander? Well, I wonder if that might take state legislation, but I wonder if there's some way that what goes on can be made public to satisfy the need for transparency, which we have today. Everyone wants transparency. I wanted transparency. I want to know what happened to my complaint. It ended with a letter entitled Confidential. Why? We have conducted a careful review, et cetera. Based on that review and on any necessary follow-up investigation, we've determined that this matter does not warrant further action. Why not? Did you disagree that the situation I described involved an unethical conflict, or did you agree? If you agreed, thank you. If you disagreed, why did you disagree? So, in sum, I think I would like to have that examined by a robust conversation. Why is the State Inspector General taking that position? And should the City Inspector General take that position? And if so, why? And I hope not.
Right. Thank you very much, Victor, for your testimony. Anyone else wishing to offer public testimony may do so now or for never hold your peace. Seeing and hearing no desire, that will conclude the public testimony portion. We're going to turn it over to final comments from the lead sponsor. Then we're going to close out. We're on a hard stop. We have another hearing supposed to start at 2:30, so we're going to adjourn this quickly. Chair recognizes lead sponsor, Councilor Andrea Campbell.
I just wanted to thank all the panelists and particularly the folks who joined us via telephone, but I also want to give a shout out to my team member, Ellie, who coordinated along with Sam to make sure that this conference line was working, that the people joined us and that it all went so smoothly. So Ellie, Sam, thank you guys so much. And thank you, Councilor Flaherty. Look forward to continuing the conversation.
Very good. That will conclude the hearing. Docket 1337, an ordinance establishing the Office of Inspector General in the City of Boston. The Committee on Government Operations is adjourned. Thank you.